Hello, this is Lisa Cummings of Stratus Admissions, and I'm really excited to be here today to present the second in a series that we're doing with the GMAT Club on finding the right MBA programs for you to apply to. Some people might say that the ideal program is the program that are the most highly selective. I disagree with that. My years at Stratus shows that there's a lot of factors that go into making the right school list, whether it's safety schools, dream schools, how you can really use those class profiles to get the best list for you. So how should you be looking at it? How should you be going about building that class list? In the next couple minutes, I'll address how selectivity plays a role, how you can use class profiles as a really important tool, but also highlight some other factors that you definitely want to be considering when you're putting together that school list, so that by the end of this discussion, you'll have some really solid tools you can use to go out there and start your school research and start to put your school list together. So this is a list, I'm not going to read it, but this is a list of the top 7 schools that are generally considered the M7. You may have heard that phrase bantered around. The M7, generally the Magnificent 7, the Magic 7. Those are the 7 most selective schools in the US. And what does selectivity actually mean? And what does that mean for you? The more highly selective a school, the lower their acceptance rate is. So that really means that that's a harder school. So the higher the selectivity, the more difficult it is to get into a school. Some people feel that, some professionals feel that you only want to look at highly selective schools because highly selective schools are thought to have perhaps better faculty, better caliber students, better job opportunities. And there too, I would disagree with that. They certainly do have great resources, but there's a lot of other schools out there that have really amazing facilities and amazing faculty that you may want to consider when you're doing your job search. So here, just so that you get a sense beyond the M7, I've broken out really the top probably 25-ish schools into buckets. And this is not a scientific, this isn't scientific work. This is just, these are your sort of best estimates is where things would go. The highly selective category, again, as I just mentioned, the schools that have the lower acceptance rates, the ones that are harder to get into. So that would comprise the M7 and a few other schools in there. The middle list is those moderately selective schools. The schools that aren't quite as hard to get into as the M7, but are still fairly selective. And then you have the less selective school on the right, a group of great schools as well. So sometimes clients will ask, well, gosh, if I'm going to a moderately selective or a less selective school, does that mean I'm going to have a less great experience? And again, I would say no. I think schools in all of those categories have different things to offer. Candidates are looking for different things in schools, and there's a lot more that goes into the process when you're figuring out how many dream schools versus safe schools, how many selective schools do you want to apply to. So all of these places will give you a great education. It's just really how do you want to go about pursuing that. Going to just take a step back and give a little bit of a further introduction to myself. Again, my name is Lisa Cummings. I work at Stratus Admissions. In the 14 years prior to joining Stratus, I was on the admissions committee at MIT Sloan. And when I was there, I read thousands of applications and I interviewed thousands of candidates for the 2-year program and all their programs. So Stratus uses a team-based approach. If you work with us on a comprehensive basis, many different people will weigh in on your application at various points along the process. And we're so confident with our process that if you work with us in round 1 with 4 schools or more, and for whatever reason you're not successful, we do offer you 2 schools free in the second round. So that's how confident we are in our process. So what does that process involve? Really, one of the biggest things that we work with clients on is that school list, dream schools versus safe schools, selectivity. The first thing that schools will look at when they're evaluating you as a candidate are your numbers. You have to meet a certain criteria. You generally have to meet a certain criteria if you are going to be considered by the school. So a thing that you can do, a tool that you can use, is look at the class profile of the schools you're considering. If you go in and you Google XYZ University MBA class profile 2024, up will pop a lot of different information. There may be demographic information on what industries candidates are coming from. The things that you really want to be looking at are the GPA and the test scores. Schools generally publish an average or mean GPA, and then they will publish a mid 80% range of GMAT or GRE scores. Why is that important to you? You really want to be looking there. You want to see, where do you fall in that range? Where are your numbers? If you're at the high end of that range, then that school is going to be more of a likely school. I don't love to use the word safe school because I think everything is so competitive these days, but safe or likely if you were at the high end of that range. If you're in the middle of that range, that's a really good target school for you. You're right in this school's sweet spot. So you're in a good spot there. If you're at the lower end of the range, that's okay too. That school just may be a stretch for you. So within that, you're going to be able to sort of determine what are the dream schools, what are the likely schools. Stratus says, as a rule, the M7 is generally all considered to be stretch schools. So when you're thinking about that class list, does it mean if you're at the low end or not on the list, should you not apply to a school? Should you not put that school on your school list? People have a lot of different ways of looking at those school lists, but don't let that discourage you, and don't let that be the only thing that is helping you. And we'll go into some more details later, but this isn't the only thing that should be driving that. If you have a school that you've always wanted to go to, has been your dream, and you're at the low end of the range, it might be worth your while just to apply anyway. So, if you have the time and you've got the energy to get a good application done and get that application in on time, it's probably worth your while applying, just so that, putting that on your list. Again, not dashing your dreams before the process even starts. So again, how does that process start? We work with clients who have a number of different ways that they're going to look to put their lists together. Some people only want to go to dream schools. They only want to apply to stretch schools. And that's okay. There's no right answer and there's no judgment. Some people feel that the ROI for them, the return on investment, is only going to be high enough. They're already in a terrific job. They're making a lot of money. It's not going to be worth them leaving the workforce to go to school if it's not a school of a particular caliber. So, and that's okay. So this is kind of a sample distribution. This isn't the be all and end all distribution, but if you're only looking at highly selective programs, then maybe you're going to be, the M7 is going to be that stretch. And then maybe a couple who are still in the highly selective range, or maybe you're only going to be applying to Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, or whatever that combination is. And that's okay to you, for you. Again, really depends on what your objective is. And again, just to note that Stratus really considers the M7 to be stretch schools for everyone, dream schools for everyone, because they are so many applicants there and so few seats. So just something to keep in mind. Another candidate that we work with, this is the majority of the candidate that we work with, and this may apply to you. These are candidates who definitely want to go to school next year. They've really decided, maybe they've plateaued at work. They perhaps want to pivot their careers. They want to learn some new skills, skill up. They definitely want to go to school next year. That again, that's sort of the bread and butter of the clients that we work for. And those school lists are more complicated, isn't the right word, but that really requires more thinking. Here, you probably want to get a mix. And again, this 25, 25, 50, that's that's one example. You could, again, depending on how many schools you want to apply to, that those percentages may change. But if you want to be in school next year, you want to apply for sure to some likely schools, schools that you are at the high end of that class profile, meaning you are going to be a more attractive candidate to them. So that should be some percentage of the schools that you apply to. You want to apply to, you all want to apply to some stretch schools, again, where you may be at the low end of the range, but that's a school that you still would be really interested in applying to. You want to have those on your list. And then you probably want to have the bulk of your schools be in that target range, where you are sort of right in the middle of a school's class profile. So you're going to have a higher likelihood of being admitted. And again, does it mean if you're not in the ranges, should you not apply to these schools? Should you, these are great questions that we get. And I can give you 2 examples on both ends of the spectrum of clients that I've worked with over the years at Stratus. I worked with one client whose numbers weren't the strongest. Most of their schools were kind of in the stretch category. They really wanted to go to one of the M7 schools. Their numbers just didn't quite match up to the M7's numbers, but that had been their dream forever. My theory and my colleagues at Stratus is we're not going to be dream dashers. If you have a dream that you want to apply to a school, the only way you're ever going to know if you would get in is by applying. So I encouraged her to apply. She did a really terrific job on her application and she got in. And again, she really didn't have the faith in herself. We really built her up and helped her put together a great application and she got in. The flip side is I worked with another candidate who only wanted to apply to Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. He had terrific numbers, perfect numbers, actually, amazing work experience. And it turns out he was disappointed. He didn't get in anywhere. We counseled him, and we would counsel anyone who only wants to apply to selective or dream schools. You need to be ready if things don't go your way, that maybe you're not going to get in. But again, if people are okay with that, that's fine. He didn't end up getting in anywhere because just sometimes that's how the numbers fall. And you can't ever tell. We can't ever tell. That's why we like to see people with a range of schools so that if they want to go to school, hopefully they will apply to one that they will get into. So just thinking about what that mix should be. And there's no right number of, if you're applying to 10, 2 should be stretch schools. Part of it depends on how many you're applying to overall. And it's a conversation that you're going to want to have. And there's some other factors that do come into play there. And what are some of those other factors here? I've talked about those. Selectivity, that first arrow, we've already talked about that. That's important. Resources, professors, networks. That's one aspect of making your school list. It's not the be all and end all. You want to consider those other arrows along the spectrum as well. Location. Some candidates only want to be in a big city. Those are the attractive schools to them. Some would rather be on one of the coasts. Some are a little bit agnostic. So this location may not be an important factor to you, but if it is, it's something you want to keep in mind. Class size is another thing that really should go into that equation for you. Again, not all of these factors are important to everyone, but that may be important to you. Would you rather be in a smaller, more intimate program, or would you rather be in a large program with many different sections and just a bigger cross section of in your cohort? What's the teaching method? Some schools use only the case method. Other schools use the lecture method. And of course, then there's some that use a hybrid. If that's important to you, make a note of that when you're putting your list together. Career opportunities. This is a big one that we think a lot of candidates don't consider enough when they're putting those school lists together. The employment rate is an important thing. You want to go in when you're doing your research and look in the career office of your schools. Where are students who graduate? Where are they working? What types of companies are they working for? And importantly, also look at what companies come to interview, because there may be a year where a number of companies that you are interested in came to interview on campus, but for whatever reason, they didn't hire anyone that year or no one accepted their offers. So they wouldn't show up in the employment data. So you may write them off of, oh, the companies that I'm interested in aren't interviewing here, but indeed they did. It's just that for whatever reason, it didn't work out that year. So definitely look at the career opportunities. And here's where I have a great example of how selectivity isn't always the most important thing. A few years ago, I worked with a candidate who was really keen to work in the oil and gas industry. They'd come from an energy background and were super interested in that. They were debating two schools, and I don't want to call anyone out, but one of them was Duke, a terrific school. The other was UT Austin, the Macomb School, also an amazing school, but it was a lower ranked school than Duke. So they went and they did all of their research, and initially they had been really keen to go to Duke. It's a great school, terrific opportunities. They were really excited for it. We had a conversation, and I suggested exactly this, that they look at who comes to hire. Well, this candidate ended up accepting the offer at UT Austin because the number of companies that came through there that were oil and gas related, that were energy related, was much higher than at Duke. And the number of students who went into that industry afterwards was much higher than at Duke. Does that mean that they wouldn't have gotten a good education at Duke? Absolutely not. But one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, that people go to business school is for those career opportunities. So that's something that you want to be looking at as well. And the last but not least, and certainly a very important thing, is tuition. Is in-state or out-of-state tuition, does that come into play for you? Have you earned or won any scholarships? That's an important consideration. How much are you willing to take on in terms of loans and debt? So how much debt are you willing to have afterwards? For some, again, the return on investment and the return on those loans is worth it. For others, it's not such a clear answer. So these are really the main things that we talk about when we're talking with our clients. And these are the tools that you really can use when you are making your school lists. So just to reiterate that, the first is, of course, you want to look at selectivity and rankings. Those things are important. But you also then, the most important tool you can start with are those class profile numbers. Look to see exactly where do you fit. So then you can see, is that going to be a dream school for you? Is that going to be a safe school? Is that going to be a target school? That's the first number, as I said, that schools look at. That should be the first number that you look at, just to get a sense of where do you fit in that profile. And then you want to, when you're doing your school research, think about these other factors. There's a lot of other factors that go into it that don't fall under the purview of my installment, but these are really the things that you want to be thinking of to get you started when you're making your school list. So with that, that's the end of my prepared comments. If you're interested in learning more about Stratus and how we work with our clients, please do scan the QR code and you can sign up for a free 30-minute one-on-one consultation. That quote is just a quote that one of my former clients wrote about working with me. We are now done with the formal part of the presentation, and I would be absolutely delighted to take some comments. Okay. I'm getting the question that is, and I'm sorry that I know I'm going to be reading the question. I applied to 10 schools this year, but didn't get in. Any advice for reapplications? That is a great question. The first thing I want to say is I'm sorry about that. It happens. It does come down to a numbers game. The good news is schools, it's not a black mark against your name or negative if you applied and didn't get in 1 year. Schools know how competitive it is. I don't know what went into your process of picking those 10 schools. But again, I would hope that you had, again, a mix of likely schools and target schools as well as stretch schools. So maybe you want to reevaluate when you're reapplying, where do you fall in your schools that you're looking at? Where do you fall in their class profile? Where do you fall in their numbers? And if you maybe had too many stretch schools and not enough likely schools or target schools, you want to maybe rejigger your list for next year. I hope that helps. And then there's another question here. If there's a school where you're higher in the middle and the lower range in different aspects, where would that lie in the likely target reach range? That is a great question. You may be higher or lower on GMAT. You may be out of the range on GMAT and in the range on GPA. That's a good question. You really want to, it comes down to how far, if it's an out of the range question, under, how much under are you? And remember, if you're talking about GMAT or GRE scores, those are the middle 80% range. So that's the 80% of the applicants had those numbers, meaning that 20% were outside those numbers, either on the high end or the low end. So the GMAT scores, most schools don't present a full range, what the lowest and highest numbers were. Some do. That can be a really helpful tool, but most don't do that. So you just want to see how far out of the range are you. If you're at the high end on GMAT score, for example, and slightly below on GPA, that's still probably going to be a target school for you. Okay. So someone is asking if the GPA is less important for international applicants than it is for domestic students. No, it is not, is the short answer. Schools, the admissions committees know what the conversion rates are. Different countries, a 9 out of 10 in one country is different than it is in another country. And schools know how that number, your score, would fall into a to B, A, B, C, D ranking, a 0 to 4 ranking that we use here. So it is equally important for international students to have a strong GPA. Impact of extracurriculars on your application. Again, a little bit afield from my topic, but I'll certainly talk about that. When you're an MBA student, you are going to be a juggler. You're going to you're going to have classes. You're almost immediately going to start recruiting for summer internships. You're going to have clubs. You're going to have friends. You're going to have perhaps a new city that you're living in. You're going to be juggling a lot. So schools like to see that you're involved in extracurriculars, if possible, at work or while you were in college, just knowing that first of all, that you can balance different things. Schools are also generally very collaborative. They like it when people are in extracurriculars to show, particularly if they're community work or working with other people, because they are collaborative. They want to make sure that you're not a cutthroat person. Most programs are not cutthroat. They're very collaborative. They want to know that you are interested in helping out others. So whether that's helping others in your community, or maybe helping out others at work, or maybe when you were in college, helping out others, those are all great things to show. So I'm going to close with that great question. It's been a delight speaking with you all. And if anyone out there needs help with applications or has any additional questions, again, feel free to scan that code or look or go onto our website, stratusadmissionscounseling.com, and you can set up a free 30-minute one-on-one consultation with myself or anyone on my team. I have a great team that I work with. And again, I thank you very much for your time and attention.